Hello everybody and welcome back to what's hopefully going to be a fairly short Warptorio episode. As we watch the bots deploy the last of the electric furnaces, let's talk a bit about what's going to be on the menu for today. And I don't know about you, but I am quite excited to finally turn on this build and see how it actually performs. Most likely we will have to do a few fixes here and there, as this was quite a massive build and I'm fairly sure that mistakes slip through the cracks, but overall I am quite confident in this setup and well, let's get to it. The most glaring problem that I'm gonna face here is power. And you've already seen me gather all the materials I have left in my storage chest in regards to nuclear reactors. My hope is that I'll have enough for 3 more blueprints or 12 more reactors, and really hope that this will be enough to satisfy the power demands of the whole base. Once I get to the lake, the first thing that I need to do is actually connect all of my generators into one network. They are currently connected by warp accumulators and they're part of their own individual grid, and it's quite hard to keep track of how much power we're actually generating here. At the time that I'm building this, I don't know the exact amount of power that I'll need in order to be able to sustain the whole base, but I know that we have about 1.5 gigawatts in the factory floor, actually in the boiler floor, and I have about 1 gigawatt of power here, and I am kind of eyeballing that I will need somewhere around 3 to 5 gigawatts of power in order to be able to sustain the whole base. And yes, I was so lazy that I've never gotten around to fixing the blueprint. I still have to manually remove those pumps that are not connected to power and put down the missing water pipes for the boilers. For the series finales, I did fix those two issues up, and I've also made a slight improvement by tiling everything with landfill so that we can just apply the blueprint twice and have everything be built automatically. But for now, most of the landfilling is already done, so I will apply the blueprint 3 times, do all the manual operations, make sure that everything is connected. But unfortunately for the third setup, I will run out of thermal pipe, and exactly for this I did leave 2 spaces at the center of the factory floor so I can set up some factories to produce whatever I would be missing. And after producing enough pipe and gathering the remainder of my landfill, I quickly run to the nuclear setup to finish that third build and also put everything that I have left of the landfill in the lake. And with that, I think we're up to a decent amount of power. Let's just hope that my estimations were correct and we don't have to come back here anytime soon. Spoiler alert, we will come back here soon. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at some statistics and see our baseline. And the two things that we can see here is, as expected, warp modules have started to be produced in very small quantities, but it will take a bit of time for the system to ramp up. And also, if we take a look at our logistic network, we'll see that we are out of a lot of things, which is again to be expected. After a 10-minute time lapse, we can see that the production has ramped up to 20 units per minute, which I kind of attributed the 30% difference to the fact that not all factories have yet the 3 or 4 warp modules in them, and that will account for productivity and speed bonuses. But, well, in hindsight, that should have been a red flag that a couple of things are actually off. After another 20-minute time lapse, we can see that the production has gone down to 0, which means that there's an issue with the build. After doing a bit of investigation, I realized that the LDS production actually stopped, but that was an easy fix, as all I had to do is enable the request from buffer chests option on the requester chest. With that, everything is back to normal, and let's see how everything progresses. Jumping ahead by 10-minute intervals roughly, I can see that the production is still quite stable at 20 units per minute, and this is the first point where I start to realize that something else might actually be off with the build. And at the next 10-minute checkmark, because the production is still very stable at 20 units per minute, I do decide to check up on the warp module factory itself. And I realized that the input requirements are not enough for just one inserter. Just a quick recap, one inserter can handle 39 point something units per second. The input required here is around 78 per second, so it's obviously above the 39 that we can support. So I do set up two chests, but for some reason I failed to realize that 24 plus 24 is still above 40, and I do set up red and blue chips in the same chest, which will prove to be an issue still. But as I quickly look and see that there's an increase in output, I miss that glaring issue. After another 10-minute time lapse with the upscaled production, I realized two things. First and foremost is that I have been recording for over 2 hours with no game sound on, so I do apologize for the deafening silence at times. And the second one is that I have indeed underestimated the power consumption of this base and that I need to set up a couple more nuclear reactors. Fortunately, the biters are not back in full force yet, but they will soon be, so this is something that I need to address immediately. As I've already used most of my resources with the last nuclear reactor build, I quickly cycled the factory to produce more exchangers and more steam turbines, and then quickly go ahead to place down the first of the two nuclear reactor blueprints. And because whenever it rains it pours, I very quickly realized that my base has an even bigger issue, and that is the fact that I've run out of fuel cells and of the uranium to produce more fuel cells. So I quickly go ahead, drag a sulfur pipe to the closest uranium ore patch, set up a remote build, get the uranium back into my factory floor where I increase the number of centrifuges that are processing uranium, and hope that this will be enough to keep me going for the remainder of the game. With that out of the way, I set up the second nuclear reactor and watch as the power slowly crawls up to almost full and get back to monitoring the warp module production again. With production now running at a full 35 units per minute, which is the nominal speed for two assembly machines, I realized that I'm getting very close on running into an issue that I was hoping to avoid for this episode, and that is the fact that I am slowly running out of copper ore, and that is because I haven't been using warp modules for any sort of smelting just yet, and also the fact that all of my ore patches are still unmodded. Unfortunately, replacing modules in already placed down assembly machines, or in this case smelters, is still not possible, so I use my bots to very quickly deconstruct all of my copper smelters and then construct them back up with warp modules in them. And once I'm done with that, I pick up all the speed modules Mark III that I have available in my base, and I go to the copper ore patches and place as many of them as I can in the mining machines. This will now produce full lanes of copper ore, and with this I'm fairly sure that we are producing more copper ore than we're actually consuming. This brings me to the second to last issue that I have with this build, and that is water. Now, I initially thought that I just miscalculated the water throughput and that 3 pipes are just not enough. So, in order to try to fix that, I connect 2 more pumps to the 2 water pipes on the west side of the factory, and just at a quick glance at that, that seems to solve the issue. But just as I'm done with that, I decide to check the pipe that's coming from the east side of the factory, and I realize that for some reason I have just not connected that water pipe to the system. After a quick checkup on that pipe and making sure that now everything is connected, we can see that everything is running at full speed and the system is even a bit oversaturated, which was to be expected because we've always built a bit more than required for the build to actually function at full capacity. And last but not least, I finally give up and realize that I do require 3 input chests for the warp module factories to be able to work at full capacity. Now, in the meantime, I did separate blue and red chips to different chests and compensated with one of the other 3 ingredients, but as you can see, that is still not enough. So I create 2 dedicated chests, one for red chips, one for blue chips, and everything else in the third chest. And for now, let's just watch and monitor, and if I'm not mistaken, everything should stabilize at 30 items per second, give or take a few decimal points. And finally, here we are, 3 hours later. Let's take a look and see what our production statistics look like. Looking at the 10-minute interval, we can see that we're right on target. That is extremely close to 30 items per minute, so I am quite happy with that. If we zoom out at a 1-hour interval, we actually see that we're just above that, so we have a bit of variation in our output. But if we take a look at the 10-hour interval, we can actually get a better idea of what's happening. We can see that there's a bit of a sine wave that is slowly reducing in amplitude, and that is to be expected because we do not have everything set at perfect ratio. And one last glance at the overall production statistics to see that we have indeed made over 10k warp modules, which should be more than enough to be able to fully supply our endgame build design. So we're gonna call this one a win. And that being said, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you here next time for what's going to be the final episode in this series.